Well, welcome to the Concord Free Public Library. My name is Anke Voss, and I'm the curator of the William Monroe Special Collections here at the Concord Free Public Library. That's for special collections, which is amazing. And just to make a little plug for special collections, we are open Monday through Friday, and you don't need an appointment. We're there during the day. So if the stories today and maybe some of the material that we brought out for you to view after the presentation pique your interest and you want to see more, you're always welcome to visit. No appointment necessary. So welcome to this afternoon's presentation, Telling a Better Story, Expand What You Know About Concord History with public historian Beth Van Duzer. Beth Van Duzer is an independent historian based in Concord, Massachusetts. She holds a bachelor's degree in English from Montclair State University and a master's degree in history focused on public history from Southern New Hampshire University. As an educator at the Concord Museum, she enjoys sharing the history of Concord with visiting students. Beth is co-chair and clerk of the Concord 250 History and Education Subcommittee. Over the past 2.5 years, she has focused on identifying individuals who served in the Revolutionary War from Concord. Additionally, she owns Concord Walking Tours, a company that offers history research and guided tours of Concord. You can find her articles about visiting Concord in its history in Discover Concord magazine. Welcome, Beth.
Hi there. I'm so excited people showed up. It's like Saturday afternoon and you're here. It's good. So I do education at the museum, which means I work with a lot of 3rd and 5th graders, and I'm gonna kind of treat you guys like 3rd and 5th graders. This may be a little more interactive than you're used to. Just go with it. Because I have the microphone, people can hear me, nobody can hear what you say. So don't worry about it. And if you only raise your hand a little when I ask for raising of hands, the camera's not gonna see it. So you're all fine, okay? Don't be scared. So how many people here play tour guide when other people come visit Concord? Yeah, like everybody in the room, yeah. So what do people want to know when they come to Concord? What do people ask you about the most? The Alcutts. Oh, we love the Alcutts. They're not in today's talk, but that's okay. Who else? What else? The North Bridge. Everybody talks about the North Bridge, yeah. Anything else? You Okay, so on the 15th, shameless plug, I'm giving a talk as a fundraiser for the Friends of Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, talking about Revolutionary War soldiers buried in the cemetery. I love cemeteries. They're my favorite. Yeah.
I'm going to guess the Battle of Lexington.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of a big deal right now, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. There's an anniversary coming up. So yeah, so people come and they want to know all these different stories. And then where do people want to visit? They want to visit where the stories happen. They want to visit the North Bridge. They want to visit the Alcutts house. They want to visit where the battles happened, right? And we, because we love where we are, we happily do so. And we tell stories. And there are some stories we tell more than others. And with the 250th around the corner, we want to update some of these stories. So I've spent 2.5 years doing research, and my job was to identify people who either had a birthplace, home, or grave, or had their service somehow connected to Concord, and compile a list. So I have over 500 names, and that's my job. And then all the stories that I find on the side are like the side gig that I can do on my own. So really, you're getting my side gig today of everything that I have found. And hopefully what we're gonna do today is expand our knowledge on some stories we already know. And you're going to get some new narratives to add to your stories that you tell people. And hopefully when people visit, they won't hear the same story. Like if they've heard you tell the story before, they're gonna hear something new this time, right? That's really what we want. We wanna bring them back with a little bit more. All right. So, why bother updating stories? A lot of us get our information from books. Most of these books are published 10, 20 years ago. History is not static, it changes. How does it change? Because of primary sources. And the Alcutts are a great example of this, right? Somebody finds letters in a trunk, in an attic, and you can write a book about it now. So how do we update these stories? People keep finding things in attics or in boxes hidden in the back of a closet, and they bring them out, and they are sources that are letters, diaries, and other things that people wrote themselves, pension applications, and we can use those stories in people's own words to update what we're telling. Our secondary sources, which are books, you rely on people's interpretations of the primary source. So you're telling somebody else's story of somebody else's story when you're going through a book. If you use the primary source, you're telling what that person said. All right, so whose stories are we gonna tell today? I have a smidgen of information for Indigenous history. The bulk of this is gonna be April 19th, Black history, and women's history. And we're gonna start out with Indigenous history. So obviously Indigenous people were here for thousands of years, long before the Europeans come and they colonize this area. And people have done some research on this, people have told stories on this, but I have a new piece of Indigenous history about a boy who lived here. So, oh wait, I should use the mouse. Hold on, there we go. Eli Forbes, not from Concord, frequently visited the Oneida country, and he was tasked with caring for Indigenous children in Brookfield who came to Massachusetts, and they would learn the English religion. So in 1772, Forbes writes a letter to Thomas Hutchinson, who's the governor, and he's like, hey, I got this other letter in the mail, and it's from Isaac of the Oneida tribe, and he assures your memorialists, so that's Forbes, that they are well satisfied with the education of their child, Xana, and think it best not to send her back, but a little boy in her place, which they will do by the first opportunity after the spring. So Forbes would go to Oneida country, and he would bring back Indigenous children to learn our religion here in Massachusetts. And one of them at least was a girl. There are 3 boys that are left in 1777. Oops, sorry. And he writes that in 1773, he was tasked for carrying 3 boys. One of them was sent to Dartmouth College. One of them was sent back to his home country. And one of them is learning some bad habits, apparently. And, we can't keep letting him learn these bad habits. So he talks to some people that are part of a council that still exists today in the government of Massachusetts, not the people, the council exists. And they say you should put him out with William Parkman. So William Parkman comes to Concord around 1770. He actually is paid by the town to keep school for 3 years. He's a tithing man, and a tithing man in town means that on the Sabbath, if people break the law, you can arrest them. So he's well respected in town. And this lad lives here in 1777. I haven't found his name yet, but hopefully paperwork will help me find the name. And then we fast forward about 2.5 years in history, and this is in the town book. The town book is here today, and it'll be open to this page. It's May 22nd, 1780, it's 2.5 years later, and William Parkman was paid £46, 7 shilling for his manservant with Colonel Buttrick in the Continental Service. So the question is, who was this man? William Parkman has never assessed a tax for enslaving someone. We do not think he enslaved anybody. I don't know, Bob Gross said he may have had an apprentice at one point in time, but this very well could be a payment for the Indigenous boy who had been living in his home. And maybe one of the things he learned was to join the military. If this had been a Black person, trust me, they would have written a word in here that would have told you the person was Black. So this is definitely not a Black man that he is being paid for. So there's still questions, but it's not a bad thing to say it's plausible. Like if this was Mythbusters, I would say it's plausible right now that this would be the Indigenous boy who lived with William Parkman. So that's your Indigenous history, that's all the update you get. All right, so remember that one. So now we're gonna talk about a famous story, and it's adjacent to the American Revolution, and I think most people in the room will figure this out. So this is about a man who was enslaved during the 1730s, 40s, and 50s. The enslaver was a man in town who was a cordwainer, which is a fancy way to say shoemaker, and a farmer. And the enslaved man eventually gained his freedom. Does anyone think they know whose story this is? He is. He's buried in Old Hill. Yeah, see, you know cemeteries. Yeah. It is John Jack, yeah. So this is the story of John Jack. So most people probably know his story. This is like the backstory. So we know that George Tolman went around and he went to all the old cemeteries and wrote down the epitaph for every single gravestone. Yeah, so this book exists in special collections. It's not out today because it's not really for this, but you could go look at it. And we know that there are tombstones missing today because Tolman recorded them when he created this book. But one thing he did when he was going around was he found John Jack's tombstone, and he became very interested in the story. So he creates a booklet. This is available in special collections, or you can find it online, this little book. And it tells the story of John Jack and Daniel Bliss. So according to tax assessments that I have found, John Jack is enslaved either from 1731 or 1742/43. So we know that John Jack and Violet are both enslaved by Benjamin Barron. I just don't know who was in the household first. Tax assessments show there is one enslaved person starting in 1731 and two starting in 1742/43. So was John Jack in their household first, or was Violet in their household first? I can't answer that yet. Also, after 1759, neither Violet nor John Jack are listed as enslaved on a tax assessment. So this page is from a court book, and I'll get a zoom in. You do not have to worry about reading this. And it's about cautioning out individuals. So today, if you want to move to another town, I used to live on the North Shore. I could move to Concord, not a problem. Back in colonial times, if you wanted to move to another town, the town had the option to caution or warn you out. And this is a legal way of the town saying, we think you may not actually make money and you're gonna become a hardship and we don't wanna pay for you. So if we don't wanna pay out of our town coffers, then we are going to warn or caution you out. This doesn't mean you actually have to leave the town. It means that if you need help from the poorhouse later, they aren't paying. Now, many people do actually leave towns once they're warned out. And this leads us to a close-up from Stoneham. So in 1762, the town of Stoneham cautioned out Jack, a black man who last came from Concord. Is this John Jack? How many free black men were there living in Concord in the 1760s? Probably one. So it most likely, I mean, we can probably say this is John Jack. So this is 1762. So that doesn't mean that this actually happened in 1762. Legally, you could take a year to warn someone out, but when I was reading this book, people were like, 18 months ago, this person showed up, and now we're gonna warn them out. So the year of this isn't as important to me as knowing that this is a black man named Jack. Because, according to land documents, we know John Jack purchased land in 1761 here in Concord twice. Once from Susanna Barron, who is the daughter of the man who enslaved her, and the other was from Joseph Taylor. So some of the land that bordered the land that he bought from Susan Barron bordered Joseph Taylor's land. So he bought land from both of those people. And then we see John Jack on tax assessment starting in 1765. So there's a tax assessment that will be out after this that you can look at that has John Jack on it. And these are just three examples. So we have 1765, 1766, and 1770. And he's being assessed on taxes for different items. Then he becomes ill, he has a will drawn up, and he eventually dies. So Daniel Bliss, who's a lawyer, kind of loyal to the King of England because he appointed him to his job, creates all this, creates his tombstone, and then says Violet Barnes is in the will as inheriting everything from John Jack. And in the probate, Violet Barnes has a new lawyer named John Brooks. He's out of Lincoln, and he asked the probate court to complete the probate because you may have heard Daniel Bliss had to leave town. He was kind of loyal to the king we mentioned, yeah, so he's not around. And that's where the story of John Jack ends for most people. But we can expand this because Violet inherits the land and the house. She's on our tax assessments. So we have Violet in 1774, and then Violet in 1781. And the 1781 one is 56. She's 56. I think it's still pounds at this point. That's the real estate tax she's assessed. And there will be a book out as well for the assessment book that you can see Violet's information on as well. So we know she's technically, in my opinion, the second Black person in town to own land. So we can update that story. And she's the first Black woman in town to own land that I know of. Then she dies. So she dies in 1789. This is the account book of Dr. Joseph Hunt. He records her death and the fact that she was about 80 years of age. So she was old. So what have we learned? We've learned that John Jack appeared on tax assessments at the same time, by the way, that other people in town were still enslaved. So he's free, and you will see, I don't know if one of the books out there has this or not, but you'll see that some other people are assessed taxes on enslaved people at the same time. And we now know Violet has a much bigger, story that we can tell, which is always nice to expand a woman's history. So we still don't know what happened to her land. I'm still trying to figure that out. And I don't know where she's buried, but she dies in Concord, so she has to be buried in Concord. And maybe she's buried back by John Jack.
Do you know where the land they owned is?
Great Meadows, yeah. So now April 19th, it's coming up, less than 50 days away. So we're gonna cover the lead up, we're gonna cover who was where, some women's voices and some patriots of color. So the lead up. We all like talking about midnight riders. The famous one is Paul Revere. He saves the world thanks to Longfellow. Yeah, he's got a great poem, right? His name rhymed properly. Then we have William Dawes, who is the forgotten midnight rider, right? He leaves at the same time as Paul Revere. They get to the Lexington Clark House at the same time, and the Hancock Clark House in Lexington at the same time. And that's when they're told, you gotta go to Concord. So then they go to Concord, and that's when they meet up with Dr. Prescott, who was visiting his fiancée. As they're leaving Lexington, Paul Revere is detained. William Dawes' horse kicks him off, and he walks back to Lexington, and Prescott's our local boy, jumps his horse over a rock wall, goes through, gets to Concord, saves us all. But we also have Timothy Merriam. So this is Timothy Merriam, part of his pension application. And in it, he writes, early on the morning of April 19th, 1775, he was informed of the approach of a British force to Concord when he forthwith gave the alarm to the inhabitants in the east part of that town and in the adjoining town of Bedford, and before daylight joined the ranks of his company at Concord, that he was engaged the same morning in the Battle of Concord Bridge and in the pursuit of the enemy on their return to Boston. Huge. To me, this is a huge story. We can't tell it enough. So Merriam's Corner, if anyone knows Minuteman National Historical Park, Merriam's Corner, that's where he lived. So he takes his horse, apparently, because I'm sure he's not running, and he spreads the word and gets back to the bridge so he can fight. So he was young. He was, 17 at this point? Yeah. So he eventually leaves Concord, he becomes a doctor, and he is buried in Framingham, and he's in the same burying ground as Peter Salem. So if you ever visit Peter Salem's grave, you can also visit Timothy Merriam's grave. So that's what's new in the lead up. We have another Concord person who spread the word. And then, who was there? When we talk to people, people want to know, where were the redcoats? Where were the provincials? Where were the townspeople on that day? Where were people? So we're going to cover this. So where the primary sources say people are, they're outside. So myths shape American history. If you think about George Washington chopping down the cherry tree, never happened. Paul Revere saving the world on horseback with a lantern, never happened, right? Well, it kind of happened, but not that way. So what we need to say is that our primary sources tell us that these different people are outside. So our redcoats, our colonists, people are outside on April 19th. And the first thing we have is these are journals of each provincial congress of Massachusetts. They were printed up long time ago. And there are 16 men from Concord who signed this deposition. And what it says is that, by the way, we were outside, right? We have Edward Thornton Gould. He is of the King's Army. So don't just take our word for people being outside. We can take the word of the other side. And he's like, by the way, they were outside. Then we have the House of. So the Wright Tavern, everyone knows the Wright Tavern in town? It used to be called, on April 19th, 1775, the House of Mr. Taylor. It was not called the Wright Tavern. I was sitting in so Bob needs to write another book, Bob Gross, because I was sitting in a meeting with him, and he's like, when was it called the Wright Tavern? I've never asked this question. This was like a meeting a year or two ago. And he went home and he looked it up, as Bob does, and he's like, oh, I found the answer. So it doesn't start being called the Wright Tavern until like in print that we found, until 1835, I believe. So here we go, 1775. We are at the House of Mr. Taylor, because Mr. Taylor owns the house. Who's there? The committees of both safety and supplies. So John Hancock absolutely was at the Wright Tavern. And they were inside doing things, right? So these are the people who were inside. It's not our Minutemen, it's not our militiamen, it's people before April 19th. So we have, if you go through this book, you will find many meetings happening in taverns, and a lot of them say the House of, and that's how you know it's a tavern or an inn. We have another one on April 5th. Yet once again, we're at the House of Mr. Taylor. Another one, April 14th, days before the Redcoats march out here. And John Hancock is most definitely there, right? And what are we doing in town, right? So where do we get our information? Go to the primary source. It will tell you what's happening. Then we have the pension of Joseph Wilson. And he tells us people were outside. And what this says is that in 1775, he resided in Concord in the state of Massachusetts, that on the 19th of April of that year, the British arrived at Concord, the stores of the army cannon with the balls, etc., in a heap and burnt them. The cannons they spiked, they took about 100 barrels of flour, they rolled them into the mill pond, and that on the same morning, the declarant hoisted the American flag on a liberty pole, that when the flag was discovered by the British, they ordered the flag to be taken down, in doing which the halyards by which the flag was hoisted got entangled, and the flag came down about halfway, which being discovered by the British officers, they ordered the liberty pole to be cut down, which was immediately done by the British soldiers. So if you've ever wondered about our liberty pole, it may have been behind Reuben Brown's house. We're kind of not sure exactly where it was. It was not in the burying ground, it was past there. What happened that day? Well, apparently Joseph Wilson put a flag on it, and then when the Redcoats marched into town, they were not happy to see that flag, and that's how the liberty pole came down. And then it is part of the bonfire. And if you all know Martha Moulton's story, she has her own deposition that she writes because she gets money for saving the town from being burned. And she says that Major Pitcairn came to her and the house where she lived and asked her for chairs to be put outside, and they sat outside of her doorway watching the Redcoats as they were going through people's houses. So another thing that says, where are the people, right? Your Redcoats are outside. Martha Moulton tells us, we're gonna believe Martha Moulton. But she stops the fire, and the fire is from the Liberty Pole. That's one of the things that were burned in town, right? So all these stories are connected. How are we connected? And then we have Dr. Isaac Hurd. So Dr. Isaac Hurd moves to Concord after the war. And he was part of the Harvard class that was sent to Concord while Washington was at Harvard. He studies for a while. When he's done with studying at Harvard and he graduates, he studies medicine. And the person he's studying under, when he's done, the person's high up in the military and says, congratulations, you're gonna be a doctor in the Continental Army. And he's like, oh, okay. They're like, you're gonna meet with your colonel at the State House. So he meets with his colonel at the State House, and then they're like, okay, meeting there, and he is then told they're going to go to Rhode Island, and Hurd is to wait for further orders. And in this letter, he says, sometime in the same July, I was ordered to be at Swan's Tavern in Concord, Massachusetts. Mr. Taylor sells his tavern to Samuel Swan. So now it's known as Swan's Tavern. It's still the Wright Tavern today, But back then, how are taverns being used? Still, the military is using them, and they use them as meeting points. I found other receipts for this in other towns, but it's nice to see this from Dr. Hurd, and that it's Swan's Tavern, which I thought was 7 for a while because of the handwriting, but it's definitely Swan, yeah. Then I just did a podcast that was recorded. It'll be out the middle of the month with Rev 250, which is Bob Allison and Jonathan Lane. And one question they asked me was, did anybody from Concord, did they go to Yorktown? And I'm like, that's a great question. And I knew of one person, but it kind of feels like something people might ask you on a tour, like where were people? Like there's more than April 19th. Just so you know, it's 8 years, not just April 19th. So we know people serve on April 19th. We know people serve at Bunker Hill. There's Dorchester Heights that people serve in. That's March 4 through 9, 1776. It's the end of the Siege of Boston. We know we send people there. There's the Relief Expedition to Canada / Ticonderoga. That's written about a lot. It's in Shattuck's History. You can read it there. Then there's the Battle of White Plains. That's October 28, 1776. Eleazar Brooks's regiment was there. Amos Buttrick of Concord was part of it. After the battle, Brooks writes, this is in June, Brooks is writing that he saw Buttrick, who was injured in his right eye, shortly after the battle and had no doubts his injury came from said battle. Dr. Hunt agreed, the Dr. Hunt we just showed his account book of. He was actually in the same company, and he's like, oh, I agree. The eye was injured, and even though this is June 2nd, 1777, so many months after the battle, Amos Buttrick was still in a lot of pain, and Hunt felt the eye was now blind. So these two documents that were written allowed Amos Buttrick to be approved for a pension in 1777. So where do we find our information? Pensions are a lot of places. Then we have Rhode Island service. Rhode Island's kind of a big deal during the Revolution, which I didn't realize before doing this project. And a number of pensions mention Rhode Island service, including Dr. Hurd's letter that we just saw before. And he mentions how the first day he arrives there, he's walking with his colonel, and he has to take grape shot out of some British prisoners his first day down there. Then we have the battles of Saratoga / the taking of Burgoyne. We have one person from Concord that I have found who was killed in action, and his name is John Corneal. And based on the date, it looks like it was at the Second Battle of Saratoga. So he's on a list for our Memorial Day list. And then we have Yorktown. So we have Jonathan Wheelock, who moves to Concord after the war. So before the war, he's in Lancaster, and he was a drummer / drum major, and he serves for 7 years. And during his service, he was encamped in Valley Forge, and he was in many battles, including Bunker Hill and Yorktown. So he gets like both ends of it, right? And while in Concord, we refer to him as Major Wheelock because he was a drum major. So we call him Major Wheelock. Yeah, it's cute, right? Yeah. Then we have John Emery, and John Emery was a resident of Concord. He was in the Battle of Lexington, he calls it, which is really the Battle of Concord, and Bunker Hill battles. But they called it the Battle of Lexington back then. A lot of the time, we know they mean Concord. So he was at the taking of Burgoyne, Yorktown. He was taken prisoner by the enemy at White Plains and was detained in a very small prison in New York City for 10 months and 10 days before he was exchanged. This guy was in a lot of the war. His pension is like really long, but it's really good. Well worth reading all the cursive. So that's just some of the little things. Were people from Concord in other battles? Yes. And they were in some pretty big battles. So I'm hoping to put some stuff together and get it out there. And then one thing that my research found was we have 24 pages of color so far. If you read Bob's book, he has, I think, 13, but he uses different parameters than I use. So he was really like residents of the town, whereas we're like birthplace, home, grave, or you know what, if you had your service credited to Concord, we take you too, right? Because why not? So the first name on the list, you notice he lacks a last name. I found him on a blanket receipt, so nobody has ever found him before that I know of. And his name is Charlestown. And May of 1775, he is on a blanket receipt. I found his death information in the birth, marriage, death book of Concord. And it says he was a resident of Concord who died at the age of 31 in August 1791. So that makes his birth about 1750, and then he would have been like 15 in 1775, right? So I don't know anything else about him yet, but I hope to. So at least now I have 2 pieces of information on him, which is more than I had last time I talked. That's good. And I do want you to notice, we have 3 Caesars on this list. We have Caesar Minot, Caesar Quokka, and Caesar Robbins. And we're gonna talk about the 3 Caesars. So here is a list. And at the top it says, a company of militia commanded by Captain Joseph Hosmer and Colonel Eleazar Brooks's regiment belonging to Concord, who marched to Roxbury to reinforce the Army of the United Colonies, March 4, 1776. So they marched on March 4th. They go, this is the Siege of Boston, right? Where we're ending the Siege of Boston without us really taking any battles like we did at Bunker Hill or anything. There's some shooting of cannon back and forth, and the Redcoats try to land, and the weather's against them because it's New England. So they wind up leaving Boston shortly after this. So this is a list of men who are paid, and we have somebody named Caesar from Concord, no last name. Which Caesar is he? Yeah. So I don't know. I have to see if the other people say they served at this time. But definitely a Caesar was there at that Dorchester Heights in 76 and was paid. Then we have Samuel Blood. So Samuel Blood, I found information about him in a probate. Guardianships are probate documents. And in 1772, it said he was a free black boy above the age of 14, and he was born of a free black woman. And of his own election, he asked to live with and have as his guardian Samuel Blood. So he was free. He enlisted for 3 years and served from 1777 to 1780. And I found evidence of him in a newspaper article. So they printed people from this company in the newspaper, and you can see there's Samuel Blood of Concord, age 21, 6 feet. He's a tall person. He had black complexion, black hair, black eyes. Then it goes in, so it tells you for everybody in this regiment what they look like. He's 6 feet tall. That's what I get out of this. He's very tall. But it's interesting to find that sometimes you can find information on people in the newspapers as well. All right, so I'm gonna tell a little story now. It's about a man enslaved during the 1740s, 1750s, 1760s. The enslaver was a man in town who was a cordwainer, fancy word for a shoemaker, and a farmer. And the enslaved man eventually gained his freedom. Whose story does this sound like? It does sound like his. This is Titus Haywood. So Titus Haywood and John Jack have very similar stories. And I wonder if over time they haven't been like put together. I've nothing to support that, but it's similar. So the 1744 inventory of the estate of the late Colonel/Dr. John Prescott listed 2 enslaved children, 1 boy and 1 girl, each worth 150 pounds. After his death, his widow inherited the enslaved children. No ages were given of the children. 11 years later, on April 28th, 1755, widow Prescott sold her enslaved man, Titus, whom she acquired from her late husband's estate, to her son-in-law, Jonas Haywood. While the exact age of Titus is unknown, it can be surmised from the 2 documents that Titus obviously ages into adulthood between the death of the one person and the sale of him. Between 1755 and 1768, Jonas Haywood regularly paid a tax assessed on Titus that ranged from 15 pounds to 20 pounds. After 1768, it appears Titus somehow gains his freedom because Haywood is no longer taxed for him. So this bill of sale and 2 other ones are going to be on the table in the back after this talk. At the end of 1776, Titus Haywood made a very important decision. He enlisted in the Continental Army. So he was mustered by Concord's Colonel James Barrett. He was the county muster master, and by Colonel Richard Varick, and he was the Continental muster master. And the document on the left shows how Titus Haywood was in Captain Hartwell's company Colonel Dyke's regiment in December 1776, February 1777. His enlistment date was December 14, 1776. The regiment was raised to serve until March 1, 1777. And it's definitely, the town is Concord on this. The other document has Titus Haywood enlisted in the Continental Army, and it states he belonged to the town of Concord, and he was engaged for the town of Concord. So I've had him on my list for 2.5 years. And because the second document said he was from Acton, I never looked for him further. It took me like 2.5 years to circle back, which is good sometimes to take a break from people. And you'll notice that his last name is spelled 2 different ways, with an A and with an E. Acton Historical Society did research on their own about Titus Hayward, Hayward, because let's misspell your name some more. No common spelling back then. And they found Simon Tuttle hired a man, a black man, to take his place, named Titus Hayward. They couldn't find a Hayward, but they found Haywood. They're like, oh, this has got to be our guy. But he was not of Acton. He wasn't from there, and they didn't know where he came from. I'm like, oh, he's ours. Like, he's totally got to be ours. So I sent the information. I sent a lot of emails to Bob Gross and David Wood. Yeah, and they're like, oh, yeah, this is good. This is good. So our Titus Haywood, who was enslaved from a child here in Concord, joined the Continental Service and served not only for Concord, but also for Acton. When he signed up for Acton, he got paid an extra bounty. They were giving out extra money. Yeah. So then he goes off, he serves this time for Acton. The roles of this regiment document an integrated company. There are many men that are black and white in this company from Middlesex County. By September of 77, Titus was noted as being sick, and in later roles, he was hospitalized in Albany. And then you'll see in this role, bottom right-hand corner, he died. So November 5, 1777, Titus Haywood died. So for most of his life, he was enslaved, but he dies a free man, fighting not only for the freedom of a new country, but for freedom of enslaved people. And then we're going to talk about Samson Yarney, a patriot of color. This QR code will take you to the website for the National Park Service. Samson Yarney was a free black man from Medford. He signs up, he fights for Concord, and he dies while he's fighting for Concord. I found some information about him, and I'm like, hey, does anybody know about him? He wasn't on the National Park website, so I wrote some information up, and there's information there. And I also sent all that information to Medford Historical Society because they, even though he was in their history books, by the way, as serving, they didn't have current information that he had served. So I sent them everything that I had found. So hopefully everybody remembers this person and that he was a patriot of color, and he fought and he died for our new country. Evidence of women. So now we're going to talk about women. Pensions. Most pensions, you're like, I was married to somebody. I had kids with him. Here's proof of my marriage. And please, can I have some money? But Sarah Ambrose, her full name is Sarah Williams Cleasby Ambrose. She was the widow of Joseph Cleasby of Concord, and then she remarried. Cleasby had been a Minuteman in Captain Miles's company. So Captain Charles Miles and Captain David Brown were the two captains of our Minutemen. Brown's men were mostly the north side of town. Miles' men, if you think about, you split downtown, and that anything south of, where Vanderhoof Hardware and all that, that would be the south side, right? Everything else is the north side. It's a much smaller town then. So he was there. He fought on April 19th. In 1840, the 99-year-old widow applied for a pension. Bless her heart, right? Good woman. In it, she stated that the regulars, so-called, at the Battle of Concord in 1775, at the same time her husband was in the battle, came to her house and took her provision from her, that they put their bayonets through her children's clothes and carried them away. I don't think the kids were in the clothes. I think it was like a pile of clothes. That's what it sounds like, right? She just didn't do the laundry. Yeah. So it's just like, you don't really have stories from April 19th from women. So this existing is fabulous. And I literally had to take 2 pieces that are, because they're all scanned in with the National Archives, I had to lay them on top of each other and take a screenshot to make sure I was getting all the wording right. So yeah, just wonderful story. Later in the pension, her 76-year-old son states how his mother sent him, when he was about 11 years old, from Concord, Massachusetts to Winter Hill near Cambridge several times with clothing and other articles to his father, who was then stationed in the service of the Revolution at Winter Hill. So her 11-year-old son, she's like, go, 12, 18 miles, whatever, take your dad some stuff. I hope he was on horseback, not sure. Could have walked, it would have been fine, yeah. But yeah, here's a story that I'm sure nobody knows, and what happened in Concord, right? Then we have Mary Hodgman. So I was paging through the 1779 folder. It's actually microfilm, as one does. And I was looking for something else when I found this. I found a request from Mary Hodgman to the selectmen or committee in Concord appointed to provide the necessaries of life for the families of such men as are in the continental service for your town, which she is entitled to from the town of Concord, agreeable to a resolve of the general court. So Mary's husband was born in Concord, but his residence during the Revolutionary War was actually Carlisle. And she's sending this from Chelmsford. And I was like, oh, a resolve. I can find a resolve. I know where to look. So I went to mass.gov, and the books are online, and you can find what was printed up. And this took me to the resolves of 1777, 1778, and the text discusses a resolution aimed at providing necessary supplies at reasonable prices for the families of non-commissioned officers and private soldiers engaged in the Continental Army. And a key point in this is provisions to families, or towns, provisions to families. Towns that have not already supported these families are directed to meet and make arrangements to supply them with essential goods starting from September. And the supplies will be based on half the soldiers' wages. And then it continues. It's really long. And if the town refuses or neglects to provide these families, the selectmen will be responsible for making arrangements. They can present their expenses. And if you got a bounty, you don't get this right away. So Mary Hodgman has asked for support. The resolve really says towns must pay. Do you think Mary Hodgman was paid by the town of Concord for the necessaries of life? Yes. How many people think yes, we paid her? How many people think no way, we didn't pay her? Yeah, let's see. So if you keep going through the folder, or microfilm, you find this. Paid Hodgman's wife, soldier, 22 pounds, 4 shillings. Under her name, we also pay Samson Yarney's wife, soldier. And he's our patriot of color who dies from Medford, right? So she was also paid. I did not find her requesting payment. Maybe it exists, maybe it's in another folder I haven't looked at. But it's really nice to see evidence of women and how they were at least partly taken care of by the town of Concord. And they aren't even residents, right? So I think including people who weren't residents was the right thing to do when we were creating this list. And then whose story? I know it's hard for some of you to believe, but not everyone wants to talk about the American Revolution. So we're gonna talk about a few other things too. So I was trying to figure out what's adjacent to the revolution or what's some other information people might wanna know, or really just we wanna know. And I went to Dr. Joseph Hunt's account book, which is in special collections. He records patient visits, payment types, deaths, births. If you want to know about somebody who was alive in the late 1700s, this is the place to go. Some people, for payments, if you can't pay, you pay with what your job is. Emerson Cogswell was a hatter. He pays at least twice with a hat for the good doctor. Another person was a cabinet maker and makes a chest for the doctor. So it was interesting to see not only what he went to patients for, but also how patients paid. And this is the 1794 bill for Caesar Robbins and payments. So in 1794 and 95, the doctor visited Caesar Robbins a lot. There's like there's another whole page on him. In March 10, 1795, Dr. Hunt visited the children of Caesar Robbins. On November 28, 1796, he visited Obed, one of the children, who had received a blow to the head. There's something about his arms and foot, and what is clear is that the doctor wrote Obed remained insensible for 2 hours. So the doctor had to be there for 2 hours, I think, to write that. So yeah. And then on December 30th, 1796, Dr. Hunt visited 2 of Caesar's children who had swine pox. And then there's an entry on September 17th, 1798, and it just stated that he visited Susan for fits at Cato Ingram's. So yeah, so how did Caesar pay for all the visits to his home by the doctor? He labored. He was a laborer. He labored. So many entries say he performed a half day or a day's work. Others had specific jobs like killing and salting up a hog, gardening. Mentioned he came late one day. He moved brush. He bound stalks, and he was getting out dung another day. So he did a lot of manual labor. Then we have John Douglas. I have never heard of John Douglas before, but he is a man of color. He's a mixed race person who was treated for a disorder for pleurisy and a fever with ague, ague? Okay, yeah. Ague? Oh, is it ague? I have no idea. Oh, yeah? Okay, cool. All right, so, and how he pays is he has credit by ringing the bell. So apparently he rang a bell. Yeah. And then we have Case, a black man, 1795. And specifically, Dr. Hunt cared for Case, including plastering his neck. And Brister, like many other men in town, paid through labor. And some things he did, Case, not Brister, Case. Some things he did was hulling corn, raking hay, shoveling dung, dressing and swinging flax. Then we have Cato Ingram. A lot of bills and payments here too. The first thing is to delivery your wife, so she delivered a child, and a second visit. There's also a cream tart listed and a dozen cabbages. Because he also had a store, but cream tarts come up a lot. Like I was going through this book and there's like cream tarts for everybody. And I'm wondering what's the secret? Like, is that kind of like bringing somebody chicken soup? It's like a cream tart back then? Love to know. In some ways he paid was a day's work on the highway, working in Great Meadows, digging up potatoes, laying wood, husking corn. Then there are 2 pages in the book of deliveries. I did not find all these deliveries in Birth, Marriage, Death. So I think there's some babies that if you didn't have a birth date, maybe they're in here. But the important thing is, if you look on the right, it's 2 pages of the wife of, the wife of, the wife of, yeah. What's your name? Yeah, you're the wife of, right? Yeah, except one. There's one entry that's not the wife of. Everything else, the wife of. We have the wife of Caesar Robbins, who had a male apparently on August 11th. We have the wife of Cato Ingram, February 15th. We have the wife of Caesar Robbins again. And then the only entry on those 2 pages that is not the wife of is Susanna Robbins. So apparently, and this is written in Caesar's regular pages, like the 2 pages that say, I visited you and how you paid me. And this is the back of the book. So in both places, it mentions Susanna Robbins, and it's a child that he delivers, named Susanna Robbins, apparently. Now it says 1799, but in the other one it says 1800. So I don't know if the 1799 is for the entry above it. Not everything's exactly clear, but we do know this person was born. All right, and then finally, the last thing I'm going to touch about is now Brister Freeman, who's a person I feel like we talk a lot in town, and a lot of information I have is new, so it would be nice to update his story. He was enslaved by Dr. John Cumming, originally enlisted in the Revolutionary War as Bristow Cumming, later used the name Brister Freeman. He serves in 1777. He's at the taking of Burgoyne. In 1778, he's serving, again in 79. He's discharged in 1780. He does a lot of service. This is the roll of the 9 months men that shows Brister Freeman and Boston Ball, 2 of our 24 patriots of color. After the war, what do we know about Brister? What are the stories we've been told? Let's update them. So here in 1781, Brister Freeman was back living in Concord as a as just a resident. And there is a receipt from the town that I had to send to Bob Gross to help me decipher because he gets 115 pounds of beef. Why is anyone getting 115 pounds of beef? And Bob thinks that it was because he got paid like a year's worth of beef. They gave him a year's worth of beef, and every 3 days he could have beef in a stew or something like that. So this is paid for by the town of Concord. So this is the town of Concord giving Brister a lot of beef. Then the next month is January, and there's a pair of shoes delivered. Then the next month is February, and there's a barrel of apples delivered to Brister. So the town of Concord is taking care of Brister, giving him a lot of meat, some apples, some shoes, right? Then I found this miscellaneous record book from the Massachusetts Archives that lists bunches of stuff for soldiers. And on March 9th, 1782, allowed to Bristol Freeman of Concord for use of blanket and gun, he being a 9 months man, so our 9 months roll that we just saw, he's entitled to 5 shillings. So if you do not have a gun to use on your own, the town actually was, towns in general had guns that they would lend out and you would have to give them back. I'm assuming he gave back his gun, and I guess a blanket too. So he's entitled to his 5 shillings. Then the other one is April 16, 1782, and it allowed Brister Freeman of Concord for his paying the doctor for curing him of a wound in 1776. 1 pound, 16 shilling, 8 pence. We don't have a record of him serving in the military in 1776. I have not found any documentation. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, because all of this was military. Everything before this, everything after, every page in this document. So I'm gonna say he served in 76, we just don't know how. Because there's no way anybody's giving him money if they don't have to, right? Or anybody money. We don't have a lot. So yeah, so these are some new things. So he was paid for different things when he was in the military, after he was out of the military. And then I was in another folder, and we have Brister Freeman receiving 18 pounds of beef in 1782. And then twice he receives head and pluck is like your organ meat and all that, yeah. But we're still, we're still giving him food, right? The town of Concord, on the bill of town of Concord. Then in 85, biscuits. I wonder if this is related to cream tart somehow. But he gets a dozen biscuits, right? And they are delivered to him. And I thought it was really neat that on the back of it, it's his mark. Biscuits again. So, for a time, this is now 1785, the war's been over 2 years. Brister Freeman is a colored man in our town, who applies to take care of poor people, and he's approved. So the town pays him to take care of poor people. So the one person he takes care of is Betty Russell, and they send him biscuits on the town's tab, 2 dozen. So how are people equal? Are our Black residents treated the same? They tax them. Trust me, we will find them on the tax records. And showing that he is allowed to bid on taking care of the poor in the town, because there's no poorhouse itself yet, and he is allowed to take care of them, that seems very equal to me too. So maybe there's a little more equality. It doesn't mean there's not racism, but maybe there's a little more equality, at least when it comes to this, than other things. And then I'm just gonna show you something that I found last night. And it's a pension. So I've been asked a lot, did any of our patriots of color apply for a pension? And I have not found any evidence of a patriot of color applying for a pension. But I found this. This is part of the pension of Solomon Twist of Burlington, Massachusetts. He's a veteran of the Lexington battle, so says his pension. And he had a few Concord men write letters for his pension. One was Abel Brown, and the other is Brister Freeman. So obviously Brister didn't write this. Someone wrote it for him, because it, once again, is his mark, but it's I, Brister Freeman, of Concord, in the county of Middlesex and Commonwealth of Massachusetts, testify and say that Solomon Twist served as an orderly sergeant in the United States service on the Continental Establishment, 18 months in the regiments, commanded by Colonels Robinson and Jacobs, in the state of Rhode Island, everybody's in Rhode Island, in the year 1777 and 1778, and that I served in the same regiments with him during said term. So where was Bristol? Right? He's with these people. If you find what they did, you can find what he did. So it's pretty, it's the only Black man who served from Concord that I found in a pension so far. It's taken me 2.5 years, so there might be more. I have time. And that is now the end of that. So hopefully now you can tell a better story after listening to this talk. Hopefully there are stories that you knew that you have now expanded, and then you've learned some new narratives today that you'll be able to share how Concord's history is not just the stories we've been telling. All right, so if there's, we can do questions if you want. We can do this, yeah. Oh wait, hold on, we have microphone. Now we'll do microphones for the audience.
So,
Thank you so much. That was very informative. Can you tell us something, the things that are happening on April 19th this year?
The roads are gonna be closed. It's
They
like
are.
the biggest thing,
Okay,
man.
and is some famous person coming to the bridge?
We have invited the lieutenant governor and the governor. I know Lori Trahan has said yes. 2.5 years ago, we invited the office of the president. We will not know until a week out if the office of the president says yes.
Oh, well, I heard Trump was going to Philadelphia.
I heard he was going to Lexington and dedicating the battlefield, but, you know. He could be everywhere. He could be in all those places. Long as he doesn't, you know, ruin the day, we're good. So blank that out. There we go.
Percentage these figures represented all the people that are recorded. The vast majority, of course, being white.
The 24 pages of color out of 560 of them?
Okay.
Who does math? I'd have to you literally use a calculator, but there's 24 out of 550-ish. If anyone does math, come back and let me know.
I got a question for you. How complete are the tax assessments that you reviewed in the town of Concord? Do they go every year, every 5 years?
Oh, this is
every
such a
10
good
years?
question, because Concord is split into quarters. How many quarters are in $1? How many quarters does Concord have? We have the North Quarter, the East Quarter, and the South Quarter. What are we missing? Yeah. And I will tell you that sometimes it's once a year, sometimes it's more than once a year. Not all of them exist for every year either. And there are some years nothing exists. Some of them, they're worn away. So yeah, so they're spotty, but we have a lot more than other communities do. So out of what we have, it's pretty good, but it's not everything. Yeah. But I love that question, great question.
Hi, I work part-time at the Alcott School and
Oh,
have
cool.
for several years. And back about 13 years ago, there was a secretary from Great Britain that was here for a while. And when she was, she attended Jack John's grave. Or do I have it? But I'm wondering, there seemed to be an interest indicated by her that the Great Britain people there were interested in him. Do you know any connection why they would be, or maybe she did personally?
Well, I did research this because I've been told that his epitaph is published all over the world. I found it in New York papers, Philadelphia papers, papers all over here. When I searched the British papers, and I'm doing it on a free search thing, not a paid one, I didn't find anything. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But we've been told that, and people just, you know what? People are obsessed with death. I'm gonna tell you right now, people like death. They like tombstones, they like cemeteries, and in the papers, they just would list people's epitaphs. And that's where John Jack was. He was just with a bunch of different epitaphs that were in the newspaper. Not necessarily for, you shouldn't believe in slavery, not necessarily for an anti-slavery movement, but just it was there. So it's very possible it was printed there too, but I haven't found it on my own yet.
Yeah.
Oh, it's in the Old Hill, what is it, John Jack? I have to think about it. If you give me a second, I can probably quote it, but I don't want to do it on camera because it'll be wrong. Right? Hold on, Anka's got our microphone.
You know, when you talk about the black people that served in the military or lived in Concord, and many of whom, as you said, were enslaved, how many people were actually mixed African American and Native American, like Crispus Attucks, who was one
Right,
of the
he's
people
both.
killed in the Boston.
I don't know if we know that answer. Let's see.
Because there was a lot of intermarriage.
Absolutely. For our people, I don't think we know. So. So Charlestown, no idea. Charles Adams, no idea. Boston Ball, no idea. Philip Barrett, no idea. Francis Benson, no idea. Pomp Blackman, nope, nope. I don't know for any of these individuals. I will tell you, people have guessed that Caesar Quokka is also indigenous, but there's a book that recently came out that's called Belonging, and the author of that book has noted that this is actually an African word, I think for Wednesday. It's on the left-hand side of one of the pages, like middle paragraph, but she tells you about this word. So as far as I know, none of these individuals were also indigenous. Up in the front. Oh, wait, you're loud, but the people at home won't hear you. There you go. Right here.
You want me to? There's much discussion of how black enrollment, for example, in World War II armies had an effect on the movement toward equality, integration, because of the role blacks played. Was there any sense that the roles that blacks played in the revolutionary armies had an effect on equality and more humane perception of the slaves?
Well, they were integrated. I can tell you that in Rhode Island, they have the all-black regiment where they also have indigenous people. But here in Massachusetts, if you look at our rolls, black people are listed along with the white people, and they do the same jobs. You have people that are wagoneers, right? So they have wagons that they take the supplies around. You have people that are on guard duty. You have people that, are just privates and they do what they're told. So you have some people, not here, I haven't found any here, but some people are servants to the colonels and all that stuff, and then they travel with them and they see the world kind of thing. So I will say, as far as I can tell, they are doing the same jobs as everybody else.
Hi, so I heard about Longfellow's poem about Paul Revere. And I heard it was actually a poem for abolition, to encourage abolitionists. And I was surprised.
It's for the Civil War, because it's the oncoming of the Civil War. So he's trying to get people, excited, I guess, about where we came from and to fight for the next. Yeah. All right, is that everybody? All right. So thank you so much. I do have a slide that says thank you at the end. You'll just have to trust me on this. So it says thank you eventually.